The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
It's amazing still that had to be said from the podium, no less. If you forgot, God bless you, that was former Defense Secretary Mark Esper in June of the year 2020, going on the record at the time because he had to, saying what he said right there, that active duty U.S. troops should not be used to quell the protests around the White House. They were happening in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. Now, according to a scoop from our friends over at Axios, Esper, in a brand new book, will say that Trump, sitting in the Oval Office, asked Esper about the demonstrators, saying this, quote, "Can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something," end quote. We should tell you right now, those of us at NBC have not read the book yet, but a representative for the publisher confirms that passage and that Axios reports. The book was reviewed in whole or in part by nearly 36 four-star generals, senior civilians, and some cabinet members. Some of them had witnessed what Esper witnessed, so they could corroborate it. We're back with Carol and Frank. Carol, I know you had some incredible reporting on the strain and the extraordinary inappropriateness of Donald Trump, but I hadn't seen this reporting that he wanted protesters shot in the leg from a, not high level, but the most senior defense official at the time before. Your thoughts?
Nor had I. And I'll say, Nicole, that I know from our reporting, mine and Phil Rucker's reporting about Esper's experience with Donald Trump on that day and for the 3 days before and for the 6 months after was a terrifying experience for him. I don't mean that he was cowering in a corner at all. I mean that he was just shocked, jaw on the floor, shocked at what the president wanted him to do at any given moment. And on this particular day, when Trump was so angry, as George Floyd protesters were flooding into Washington, D.C., coming to the White House to protest and demand that their government, that the executive branch, that their president do something about the murder at police hands of an unarmed individual, their protest, very forceful, very aggressive, at least on that weekend, beginning on Friday, had infuriated the president by the 1st of June. And he was like a lion roaring on that Monday into Esper's face, into the Joint Chief, Mark Milley's face, into the face of his Attorney General, Bill Barr, at the top of his lungs saying, we have got to get tough and medieval on these people. And now we know from Mark Esper's own memoir, litigated with the Department of Defense and reviewed by his fellow generals, now we know that the president had urged him to shoot the protesters. Esper says, I think quite rightly, that the good news is it was an easy decision, and his answer to Trump was no. It was absolutely no. But the bad news for Trump was, forgive me, the bad news for Esper was that Trump was so foaming at the mouth for violence against these anti-violence protesters that Esper had to find a way to talk him down successfully. And that was very hard, very, very hard indeed.
You know, and it culminates, I think, with the display of Mark Milley in his fatigues, right, Carol Leonnig? Doesn't that come when he has the square, he goes out there with the Bible and does what he does? And, I mean, what is amazing to me is the stains he left on the military from, you know, I mean, we always examine Trump in relative terms. So relatively speaking, it's good that it was easy to say no to shooting American protesters. But it's pretty bad that he dragged the military into this at all, isn't it?
You know, I'm not an opinion writer, but I will say from the perspective of the military, both active and duty and in uniform and civilian military, Mark Esper, from the perspective of those individuals, this was a horrific series of requests from their president. And one of them was, can we shoot them? The one we reported in our book was, can we get the active duty troops out here to fend them off and to have active weapons drawn on these individuals? ESPER said no to that as well, but tried to bring National Guard in just to give an optical presence. But at the end of the day, once Mark Esper and Milley are, without any explanation, kind of dragged behind Trump through that photo op, the vicious clearing of peaceful protesters at that point on Monday, the clearing of the beautiful park, iconic park outside the White House. After they are dragged behind him, both of them come away with nearly identical reaction, which is, Trump played me, and this is never going to happen again.
Frank, I want your thoughts. I want to read a little bit more of what's being reported. This is by CNN reporting on the book. Top U.S. generals rejected Trump's suggestions that military should crack skulls during protests. Quote, that's how you're supposed to handle these people, Trump told his top law enforcement and military officials, quote, crack their skulls. Trump also told his team that he wanted the military to go in and beat the F out of the civil rights protesters. Quote, just shoot them, Trump said on multiple occasions inside the Oval Office. I'm done asking if it's a crime for which Donald Trump will be held accountable for. I think the answer comes gushing in and day out. Probably not and probably not. But he's the leading figure to be the Republican nominee for 2024. And if you're to believe the polls, which I don't always, he certainly has a shot at having that job again. And do we think he's going to hire Mark Esper to run the Pentagon? Or do we think he's going to hire someone who might not think it's an easy decision to say no?
So first, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the obvious, which is that many Americans are growing very weary of former Trump officials who are coming out with books telling us what we should have known back when it was usable.
The opposite of the tell-all, right? Tell a little, a lot too late. Yes, yeah. I hear you.
Yeah, or tell us something we don't know, really. And I hope they're as forthcoming with a grand jury or a select committee as they are with their publishers. But let me move on. Yes, it's illegal. It's a civil rights violation under color of law to use excessive force, namely to shoot people who present no viable threat to law enforcement at the time. So, yes, you could go to prison for that. But this brings up something that really didn't get enough attention when it came out last month. And, in fact, it got my attention so much so that I decided to devote an entire column for MSNBC Daily to this topic, which is that the committee members came out and said, it might be time to revisit the Insurrection Act. Now, the Insurrection Act dates back to 1807, and we have not revisited the Insurrection Act. And so what do we read into that? We better pay attention. If the Select Committee is saying they have a problem with the Insurrection Act, what does that do? It allows the president and the president only to use active duty military troops and actively deployed National Guard armed troops to put down an insurrection. We have a great definition of insurrection in the law. We have no definition of the parameters of a single U.S. president and what he can do and how long he can do it to suppress an insurrection. We have a War Powers Act so that if we use U.S. troops abroad, we have to go to Congress. There are time limits that you can deploy troops before Congress has to weigh in and they can stop it. But guess what? If a single U.S. president wants to use U.S. troops to go to war against the U.S. people, there's nothing stopping him, and there is no requirement or time frame for Congress to weigh in, be notified, and to stop it. So I do agree that we need to revisit the Insurrection Act. The problem, of course, is who's going to review it and revisit it when this Congress won't touch it in terms of an authoritarian president scenario.
It's a good thing to always, as Carol said, we sometimes lose some of the trees staring at the tallest trees in the forest. It's a good thing to always ask when we have a chance to talk to 1-6 committee members, which we will in the next hour. Thank you.